Hi, welcome back. We were talking about ancient Rome, specifically the fall of the Roman Empire. And what we had talked about in part one were the four factors that had weakened Rome from the inside. We had started by looking at the economic factors, problems with money. We had looked at the political factors, having bad emperors. We had looked at social factors, people really losing interest and losing their confidence in Rome. The rich continued to rich extravagantly, and the poor kept getting poorer. And then the last factor was military. The military wasn't getting paid. They had to hire mercenaries who would fight for less, and that weakened the Roman military altogether. Now, as we continue on with this, we'll keep those four factors in mind. But I want you to know that there were people who tried to fix things. So there was reform that was attempted. One of them comes from Emperor Diocletian, who you see over here on the right. He becomes emperor in 284 A.D., and it's pretty clear to him that he needs to try to fix some of these problems. And so he definitely ruled with an iron fist, and he was an absolute ruler. He was an absolute emperor, and he started limiting personal freedoms, and he did that to try to create the better good for Rome. So one of the things he did with his power is he doubled the size of the army. He was able to find more soldiers for defense. He was able to pay them, and that was going to be a step forward with the certainly the military problems that Rome had been experiencing. He sought to control inflation. That's not something that's easy to do. You try to limit the amount of money that you create so that prices don't go up very quickly. I mean, that's really what happens with inflation. Again, inflation is the devaluing of money. And if your money is worth less, then you got to spend more of it to get the things that you need. So he tried to control that. And it worked to a certain degree. One of the other things that he did, though, as you can see this image at the bottom, he split the empire into two pieces. Latin had been primarily the language spoken in the Roman Empire, but in the eastern half, which included Greece, they spoke a lot of Greek. So he decided, because the empire was maybe getting too big, he decided to divide the empire in two. So you had the Greek-speaking east and the Latin-speaking west. And that's going to matter here, because as we get closer to the end of this unit, we're going to see how one of those sides falls completely, and one of those sides continues to thrive. And we will definitely make that clear as we progress here. So here you can see the split of the Roman Empire. Rome still is the capital over here in the western half. This half spoke Latin. Over here you had more Greek spoken. And we're going to see eventually this city right here, this area, Byzantium, we're going to see the building of the city of Constantinople. And when we get to our last outcome of this unit, this side of the empire is where we're going to be looking. So I just kind of want to plant those seeds right now, knowing that we're going to talk about this a little bit later. So that brings us to one other emperor, Emperor Constantine. And you've actually heard of Constantine because he was definitely very instrumental in helping Christianity become a legitimate religion. If you remember, he issued the Edict of Milan, also known as the Edict of Toleration, which allowed Christians to worship without fear of persecution. So let's talk about what Constantine does in this part of the story of the fall of Rome. Again, here's a review for us. He had embraced Christianity due to the vision he had at the Battle of Milvian Bridge. I told you this story. He had seen this vision of the Chi symbol, which is an early Christian symbol, sort of looks like the cross, and he decided to put that on the shields of his soldiers. He went into battle the next day, and he won the Battle of Milvian Bridge, which made him the sole ruler of Rome. And that then made him the first Christian Roman emperor, although he did not embrace Christianity until his deathbed. So he then issued the Edict of Milan. We said it's also known as the Edict of Toleration, which allowed Christians to worship freely. And that's really important. Had he not done that, it's very possible that Christianity may not have survived. But how does Emperor Constantine fit into this side of the story when we look at the fall of Rome? Well, what he does is he moves the capital of Rome. He recognizes that the eastern half that had been speaking Greek, was really kind of more of the wealthy side of the Roman Empire. Trade routes still went through there. They weren't experiencing the economic problems that the western half had been experiencing. So he decides to move the capital of the empire east to Byzantium, and he builds a new city. Well, you can imagine you build a new city, you got to figure out what you want to name it, and so he's going to name it after himself. The new city is later renamed Constantinople. It's in modern day Turkey. It's not called that anymore. Today it is called Istanbul. After a while, it was taken over by the Ottoman Turks, which were a Muslim group, and they renamed that city Istanbul. But as mentioned, the Eastern Empire continued to flourish due to trade and wealth that continued to move through that region. So again, when I showed you that map of the eastern half and the western half, the west is falling apart, where the city of Rome is. That's experiencing all these issues. Those four factors, the economic, political, social, and military factors. But in the east, they're still doing okay. And that'll matter as we continue to progress through this story. Here's just a picture of the Battle of Milvian Bridge. Here's the Chi symbol I was just talking about that Constantine put on the shields of his soldiers. Now, the Western Empire crumbles. We've got a weakened state. Let's talk about how it actually falls apart. The decline of the Western Roman Empire took place over many years. In fact, many years is probably misleading. It actually took place over several centuries. We're talking over 300 years. It was slowly weakening. I mean, that's longer than the United States has even been a country, if you want to put that in perspective. Now, the final collapse came to the internal problems that they had been having, worsening internal problems. Again, I'm repeating myself, but it's those economic, political, social, and military factors that were weakening Rome from the inside. The separation of the Eastern and Western Roman Empire also helped weaken Rome as well. The wealthier East continued to thrive, where the West continued to sort of fall apart. Now that they were divided, they really couldn't help each other. So the separation of the Western Roman Empire from the wealthier East was also a factor. But when we look at this, the biggest reason why Rome fell was outside invasions. And these outside invasions are going to come in a lot of different ways from a lot of different groups. But Rome could not prevent its own demise. You didn't have soldiers and legions and military strong enough to prevent these invasions, because those weakening issues that we had been talking about made it impossible for that to happen. So, Germanic invasions. So if I were to ask you, what is the immediate cause of the fall of Rome? I mean, what was the final straw, the thing that actually caused Rome to fall? It's these Germanic invasions. Those other problems allowed this to occur, but this is the deciding factor. So here's what happened, and we're going to reference this map here down below. It's a bunch of Mongols, early ancestors of Genghis Khan. We're talking probably about 800-900 years before Genghis Khan. Early form of the Mongol nomads known as the Huns were pushing west into Roman lands. Notice how these arrows are showing us that? And when they do that, they cause other people in those territories to scatter. And some of those people in those areas were pretty good warriors themselves. And so if you have the Huns moving in, you know the Huns are going to absolutely slaughter you. And that's what the Huns did. You're going to start running away. And so as the Mongol nomads, the Huns, moved in, they forced Germanic peoples to move into Roman Empire's borders and push into Roman lands. So these Germanic invasions weren't invading Rome because they wanted to. They were invading Rome because they had to. They were getting pushed out by the Huns, and they knew Rome had food and had resources that they didn't have, so they were forced to invade Roman lands. So as these Germanic tribes, and there was a whole bunch of them, Lombards, Visigoths, Vandals, Saxons, Franks, all sorts of different groups. And they were uneducated, they couldn't read or write, they had grown up in a pretty brutal style of living that was never really part of the Roman Empire. And they moved into Rome and caused a lot of problems. And so it was the last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, who basically was ousted by these Germanic forces in 476 AD. And so this is what historians say. They say this is the moment that the Roman Empire fell, because the Romans are no longer in control of their own territory. And again, that all happened because the Huns pushed west into kind of northern boundaries of Roman lands, these Germanic peoples, these Vandals, Visigoths, Saxons, Lombards, Franks, they had to move into Roman lands to survive, and they basically invaded and took over Rome. And when this last emperor, Romulus Augustulus, left, Rome was no longer controlling Rome. It is the fall of the Roman Empire. So these Germanic invasions really are the main cause of the fall of Rome. Attila the Hun was one of the warriors who is well known to be a member of the Huns who helped make this happen. We're not going to talk too much about him, but I do want to reference him here. Here's some of the invasion routes. Again, here are the Huns coming in from the eastern side. They're moving west. And here's all those different tribes: Vandals, Franks, Lombards, Saxons, Angles, Ostrogoths, Visigoths. So you notice how they're all pushing into Roman lands. And by doing so, they're disrupting life for Rome. And once that Roman emperor leaves, Rome no longer is controlled by itself. It's basically a free-for-all here in Roman territory. This could have all been avoided if those emperors, those earlier emperors, had taken care of the empire and kept the military strong, kept the people strong, and they certainly could have fought back, but they just did not have the power to do so anymore. So here's a picture of Romulus Augustulus. He's deposed, he's removed from power, and Rome is no longer controlled by Romans. It's just another image of the Germanic people. They're pretty primitive. I mean, they're brutal fighters. They're not civilized like the Romans, so I kind of like the dichotomy of this image here as they take over. And so if we go back to our Jenga game, the tower has fallen. We've seen 5 reasons: economic factors, political factors, social factors, and military factors that weakened Rome, but it was really those Germanic invasions which was the final push to knock over our tower of Jenga. Rome is no longer secure, and Rome is no more. 476 AD is the fall of Rome. So here's our result. The Western Roman Empire was no more, but the Eastern Empire would continue to thrive as a region known today as Byzantium. So we're going to talk, our last outcome of this unit, we're going to talk about Byzantium. That's everything you see here in pink. Really cornerstone by Byzantium here, which was later renamed Constantinople. And so this half has fallen, but this half kind of hangs on for several more centuries. So that'll be the topic of our last part of this unit. All right, let's wrap up the fall of Rome here with our constructive response question. The question simply says, summarize the factors that contributed to the decline of the Roman Empire. Well, we just have a whole bunch of information that we can use to answer this. Certainly we can talk about the political factors, the military factors, the social and the economic factors. And you have several examples from your lecture notes that you can use to answer that, whether it's the gap between the rich and the poor that's widening, the generals who are taking power for themselves, the lack of funds in the Roman Empire, the idea that people were not really associating themselves with Rome anymore. There's many different things that we can use. And to really answer that question properly, I would try to take one specific example from the social, political, economic, and military. So that could set you up with 4 sentences right there. And then you have to talk about those Germanic invasions, those Germanic tribes being pushed into Roman lands, disrupting life for the Romans, ultimately causing Rome to fall, at least in the western half of the empire, in 476 AD. So go ahead and rate yourself on a 4, 3, 2, 1 scale, 4 being I think I can answer that question, 3 being I think I could be pretty close, 2 being I need some work, and 1 being I am not really even sure what this question is asking. It's always good to self-assess yourself, so please go ahead and do that. That's going to do it for us here this time. Hope you learned something. We'll see you next time.